Hello and welcome back to another Understand Your Buyer video. In this video, we're looking at exposure time. So what is it? Well, the more a buyer is exposed to you and your message, the greater your chance of selling to them. So we have to be mindful that we need to have the maximum amount of exposure time possible. And this kind of feeds into that notion of following people up a certain number of times, etc., etc. But being mindful of how often a potential buyer is exposed to you will help to indicate how ready or how soon they may be to buying. There is a rough, loose correlation between more exposure time means higher chance of purchasing. How does it work? Well, it works because over time, we become more familiar and trusting of people and things and products and services. When something is new, it's really easy to be skeptical and guarded around it. But when things are familiar, it's a different ballgame. It's the difference between hanging out and speaking with your friends versus talking in front of an audience of people you don't know. You behave differently in both those scenarios. The only difference is the amount of exposure time you've had to those two different groups of people. Ultimately, this comes down to the rule of 7 notion, that marketing maxim, which was actually developed in the movie industry in the 1930s, where studio bosses discovered that a certain amount of advertising and promotion was required to compel someone to see one of their movies. So way back in the 1930s, they realized that we need to tell people about things multiple times and have as much exposure time as possible in order to get them to buy from us, or in this case, come into our movie theater. So how can you use it? Well, it's pretty obvious, I guess. You quite simply need to consider how you can maximize the time your potential buyer sees you, from longer form videos and podcasts where they can watch you for longer and hear you for longer, to in-person events, meetings, calls, social media posts, direct mail, every single touch point you can imagine. The more time people spend in your company or thinking of you, but in your company, and in your company could be watching a video on YouTube, for example, the more people spend time in your company or thinking of you, the higher your chance will be of making the sale. So that's exposure time. Whilst there's no magic number for following up, and this is far more an art than a science, there's a fairly logical understanding and argument that the more time you're exposed to something, the more likely you are to feel familiar with it, and thus the more likely you are to potentially buy it. Well, that's it for another Understand Your Buyer video. And if you like this kind of stuff, then you'll definitely like the book, which you can buy at understandyourbuyer.com.